Now, I timed it well. Samantha Ferretto, hi, and welcome to the podcast.
Hello, Lee. Thanks for having me.
It is such an honor to have you. This is a conversation I have been waiting for just the right person to bring on the podcast to have this conversation with, and you finally graced the heavens of the coffee industry with all of your knowledge and showed up and was like, I can have a conversation with someone who knows what the fuck they're talking about. Yay. And you're in the coffee industry. Yay. So this is all exciting. So you are, to be clear, you are a former registered psychologist.
That's correct. Yes, correct. I've done about 10 years in psychology.
Excellent. And you are now a coffee professional working with, you own Four Birds Coffee yes. Artisans. Did I say that right?
Yeah, Coffee Artisans. It's fine.
What does that mean?
So Four Birds refers to our family. So we're a family of 4 birds.
So you and your partner and your 2 little kids.
Yep, 2 daughters.
Oh, bless. So you're a family of 4 female birds. That's 2 little birds and 2 big birds. I love that. Yeah. That's super sweet. And where are you based now?
So we're in Ballarat, which is in regional Victoria in Australia. Yeah.
Nice. There's a lot that happens in Ballarat. I used to work for IBM, and we had we used to have a data center there. I think it's still there.
Yes.
Is it still there?
Mount Helen. Yep.
Yeah. So anyway, let's talk about sexual harassment.
Hey. So uplifting.
So uplifting. So we're going to talk and do a deep dive over the next couple of hours about sexual harassment, because we get asked about it a lot. I get told stories from women and men, mostly women. There have been a couple of men. I get told stories of incidences that they have experienced over the years of sexual harassment and sexual abuse. And I also get asked by employers, how do they make their workplace safe so that they never experience it? Which is a really fair question. And I typically take the route that we can't tell you how to bring a sexual harassment policy into your workplace, because the environment that you're in is different. There are some standard things that just shouldn't appear in any workplace, but sexual harassment a policy in Saudi Arabia, in a cafe in Saudi Arabia, looks very different to a sexual harassment policy that exists in where I am, San Diego, or in anywhere in Australia. And so what we have been talking about recently is helping people start conversations to let people know that it is not acceptable in this workplace. And through the research that I've done for this episode that you have guided, for anyone who's listening to this, Sam has been a direct guider of my knowledge accumulation for this episode, and it has been fucking outstanding. So thank you. You sent me lots of things to check out, and we're going to talk about a lot of that stuff. And I'm going to be asking you a lot of questions, and hopefully you'll be vomiting out a whole bunch of information and experience. But I want to start with some definitions. And one that you sent me was from the Equal Employment Opportunities Commission in Australia. And they had a really great definition for sexual harassment. And I'm going to read that out. It says, unwelcome sexual advances, requests for sexual favors, and other verbal or physical conduct of a sexual nature constitute sexual harassment when this conduct explicitly or implicitly affects an individual's employment, unreasonably interferes with an individual's work performance, or creates an intimidating, hostile, or offensive environment. So that's sexual harassment. You have an additional way to look at sexual harassment. What is that?
So sexual harassment, I define in my own words as discrimination of a person based on their gender.
So help me understand that. That sounds a little counterintuitive to what I would think sexual harassment is. So help me break that down.
So if I was to give you an example, it would be denigrating a person based on certain characteristics that are typical for a certain gender. So if I was to give you an example for a male, calling a man a sissy because they're easily embarrassed by pornography is something. So sensitivity is emotional sensitivity is a trait, is deemed a female trait, I think, by society, and it's a negative thing for a man to express that.
Yeah. Or society's decided it's a negative thing for men to express it. So let's call them a sissy or a pussy or any of those kinds of things. And let's shame them into that. So that's a form of sexual harassment. Is that correct?
Yes. That's where it starts. That's called gender harassment.
Okay. And what's an
according
example
to the research? So for females, say that they go for a job that is typically in a male-dominated industry. So, for example, they want to be a tradie,
or a coffee roaster,
or a coffee roaster, even playing practical jokes with their tools, hiding their tools, their machinery, saying they can't do a particular thing because they're a woman. That kind of thing is gender harassment, and can have a really negative effect on the person. They can really take that stuff to heart, and it can have a negative effect on their mental health. It can have a negative effect on their desire to be at work and on their performance, and all that stuff is really important for leadership to consider in an organization.
So what we're saying is that sexual harassment starts with gender harassment. It's one of the seeds of it. Is that correct?
So the research is starting to point to a progression in severity. So sexual harassment starts with negative conversations in relation to gender in a workplace.
Wow. I wouldn't have, I don't know why I'm surprised by that, but I really am. So this is new research that's coming out. Is that correct?
So this is the particular article that I'm referring to is a review of it's a summary of all the current research, and it was published last year. So it's a really current article, and it's a really good free resource that's available on Google. And I would recommend putting it on your website.
We'll put it in the show notes to this episode, and I'll get all these resources from you, and we'll list everything in this episode.
It's a really good read. They're quite aware of the methodology of the research that they've reviewed, and they haven't included research that is of poor methodology, which is really important in scientific kind of.
Bad science is the core of all evil, as far as I'm concerned. With Russian trolls, and the whole world is fucked.
You don't want to be making conclusions on bad kind of information.
No.
So they've made an effort to kind of include good research, and have made some really interesting points. I learned a lot. I didn't see, and this is true, they mentioned this, 50% of women who they describe a study, 50% of working women describe experiencing sexual harassment behavior in the workplace, but only 20% of women actually label it as sexual harassment.
And that's why I'm surprised by your definition when you said it, is because I experienced that stuff at work pretty much every single day that I worked, whether it being corporate or whether it being coffee. And I would never have said that stuff was sexual harassment. I would have just thought they're just being assholes. But same, right?
Yeah, and that's where it starts. And it can be pervasive through an organization. And if the leadership are doing it as well, then they are kind of setting the tone for the organization and setting the culture. And it's just an increased risk. You're putting, if you have that in your workplace, you're at increased risk of having a more severe case of sexual harassment.
And that's kind of Philip Zimbardo's work. We're going to talk a ton about that side of things. in a second. I want to dive into a couple more definitions before we get into everything, if that's okay.
Sure.
There were a couple of other elements of sexual harassment, right?
Yes.
Go ahead.
So there's sexual coercion, which is making your some negative outcome of your employment on sexual, kind of doing sexual favors or going on a date or something like that. So that's, bringing in some kind of employment negative outcome if you don't engage in certain behavior related to meeting someone sexually.
Right. So, for example, I mean, I've experienced this quite a lot, to be honest, and most of it was when I was in the music industry.
Okay.
And it's rife there. One of the more vulgar situations was when I was in the studio with a producer, and we were, over halfway through the song. The song was doing great. I was really excited. He seemed really excited, but he definitely held the power structure in that situation. And he turned around. He got up from the desk, turned around, undid his pants, pulled his pants down, flopped his schlong out, and said to me, "If you want to finish the song, get on your knees."
Oh, wow. Wow. That is terrible.
That's sexual coercion, right?
Totally.
Right. And so I literally stood up and walked out and left the situation. I was so scared to leave, but I was even more scared to stay.
Yes.
I often say my heart is racing even just reliving that story.
Yes.
And so those are the kinds of situations where I say to people, it's the things that you say no to that are as definitive in your career and in your life as the things that you say yes to. So I said yes to that situation because I was convinced that this person, he had the reputation of a super producer, and I wanted people to know that I had worked with him and for us to create some great music together. But when he did that, I often say that my greatest achievement of moving to LA when I did to record an album was that I went in with my integrity and I left with my integrity, but the cards were stacked against me. And it's how I knew that, music industry wasn't going to end up being for me after 10 years. But that's an example of sexual coercion. Another example in the coffee industry could be if someone was telling you that they were going to make sure that you made a better position or you got paid more money if you did certain
went
things.
On a date with someone. Went on a date with your manager.
It doesn't have to be as obvious as what happened to me in the studio. It can be a lot more subtle than that.
Yeah, that's quite severe. In terms of the
I wish severe and unusual were correlated, but in certain industries they're not.
No, they're not, unfortunately.
Right? And we need to be very clear from the onset here. I have some numbers that say that Kate Jenkins, the Sexual Discrimination Commissioner in Australia, has mentioned that 39% sexual harassment is reported by 39% of women and 29% of men. So from the outset, I want anyone who's listening to this to be clear, we are not just biasing this towards we have to protect women, we have to protect everybody.
Yes.
We have to protect men, women, transgender, gender non-binary folk, people who are gender fluid, everything, every human, no matter what gender you identify with. If you are being preyed on by predators, we have to protect everybody. Okay, so this is not like we're excluding anybody, and I just want to be clear about that from the outset and the beginning of this discussion. So, keep going.
So then we have, after sexual coercion, we have unwanted sexual attention, which is pretty self-explanatory.
Yeah.
I've only experienced this once. I was a student and working in a prison, and got whistles and invitations up to houses as I was walking through one of the neighborhoods.
Wow.
Yeah, and that was pretty scary as a student, being in a prison, first of all, and then having that happen was pretty scary.
It's just ridiculously intimidating, isn't it?
Yeah, yeah.
What category of those things does it fall into when there's a practice that I just don't understand that happens amongst men, and where they like they tap each other's butts and they tap each other's penises. What does that fall into in that category? Is that
so? If that happened in the workplace, I was a manager, I would be requesting that didn't happen, because I would just think that was inappropriate for a workplace setting. I would want my employees to be professional, and for me, tapping someone on the bum or tapping them on the penis is not a professional thing to do. And I just wouldn't want that kind of behavior be acceptable in my kind of workplace.
Is that related to unwelcome sexual attention?
Yeah, definitely.
It is, right?
I would describe it as that. Yeah.
Yep. And so, I mean, I know that it's something that happens amongst, and it can tend to be a cultural thing. Different, like, ethnic groups do that. My brothers and all of my cousins and all of that, they all used to do it to each other as like they were mucking around with each other. And then in the workplace, in the coffee industry, I noticed that it was happening amongst some of the Greeks and Italians and Arabs and whatnot. And then it happened with one of the Australian boys, and he was like, "What the fuck are you doing? Like, this is weird." And they didn't understand that this was culturally inappropriate. For them, it was just, and they thought that there was something wrong with him. "Oh, you pussy, blah, blah, blah." No, not okay. Yes, not okay. Yeah. You shouldn't be doing it. Yeah. Another practice.
This speaks to the point that you made earlier, that in different countries, different rules are going to be okay. So in that situation where you've got different cultures working in the same workplace, it's tough to work through. Like, you have to have these conversations, and they're not easy conversations to have, but that someone needs to kind of take the leadership and decide what's appropriate and what's not for their kind of workplace.
Oh yeah, and I want to go ahead, please.
Sorry, and if someone's saying that it doesn't sit right with them and they don't like that attention, then it's really important that they be listened to and that be respected.
We had a situation that I observed in San Diego where one of the baristas came up to me and she said, "Hey, I'm new as a barista. Is it normal for boys to touch girls on the boobs in coffee?"
Oh, wow.
I was astonished that was even a question. That we should think that the workplace is what determines whether it's appropriate or not to be touched on the boob by another sex or the same sex. Your body is not anything that should be welcoming, that you should have to experience unwelcome behavior in. But what was happening was that a couple of the boys had been coming up to her and just like touching her on the boobs.
Wow.
And I said to her, "Why haven't you told someone about this?" And she said, "I didn't want people to think that I was uncool."
Yes.
We've all been there. And so, this is really why I wanted to have this conversation with you, is because people are completely, they're terrified about not being accepted. They're terrified about how to draw boundaries, and the low barrier to entry of our industry means that people come in without having any experience in professionalism and not capable of drawing their own boundaries. And I've said on here before, and I'm sure at some point somebody's going to tell me that it's not okay to say this, but I'm going to say it anyway. You have to learn to draw professionalism boundaries with, for example, the way that you come to work dressed. One of the boys, when I spoke to him about it, he said, "Well, she shows up and she's got side boob. It begs to be touched." No, it fucking doesn't. No, it fucking doesn't.
Mm.
But at the same time, you draw a professional boundary if you, not that it's not right. I want people to know it's not right that if you show side boob that boys want to touch your boobs. I'm not saying that that's right, but I can tell you something. If you don't have side boob showing, it is a non-verbal boundary setter. If you dress professionally, I don't know the psychology behind it, but I absolutely know that boys are going to be less likely to think that you are sexualizing yourself if you don't show side boob while you're being a barista at an espresso bar.
Yeah. Yeah, both sides have a responsibility in any situation. Dr. Phil, I hate to quote Dr. Phil here, but
I love Dr. Phil, to be honest with you. I don't watch him. I just think, like, the guy says the hard shit. He says the things that is very uncool to say these days, and they're all about traditional family values and whatnot. And sometimes they need to be said. So please go ahead and quote the man.
The man, he says, you teach people how to treat you. So if you allow someone to do that one time and then you stay in that situation, expect that they're going to do it again and again if you don't say something.
I love that.
Don't ask for them to treat you any differently.
Yep. And you can reteach people. You can absolutely reteach people how to treat you. And the magic bullet there, and I'm going to quote my friend Jamie Berry here, is all about boundaries. I really do have to introduce you and Jamie because you two are going to be the psychologists of the coffee industry. So it's going to be fantastic. I feel like we're very fortunate to have both of you. So let's talk about the definition of being a predator, of predatory behavior. What's the definition of a predator?
So a predator, in my own definition, would be someone who gets a kick out of hurting someone, and because of that kick they're more likely to do it in the future, so they do it repeatedly.
And so in order for somebody to be a predator, wait, let me think this out loud. So a predator has prey, right? But in order for a predator to feel satiated, they need to feel that they can have access to prey in the workplace. Is that correct?
Yeah.
Otherwise they're just going to go away. They're not going to stay and
yeah.
Is that correct, or do they create it?
So you're touching on a really, really important point here. And that is that people come to the workplace with their own individual characteristics, okay? Say, for example, there's a predator, as you call them, with lots of sexist attitudes. He comes to work with sexist attitudes. And
Can you define sexist attitudes for us?
So he's very masculine. He doesn't believe women should be in leadership. He believes that women shouldn't work so much. He thinks that they should be at home looking after the children, and those traditional, he
women are less
identifies
than men.
with those traditional gender roles. The women are less than men. They shouldn't have a say in certain things. It's okay if you tell them to shut up because sometimes they don't know what they're talking about, that kind of stuff. If that kind of person is in an environment that does not support his attitudes, let's say, that has rules around his kind of sexist views, that you can't express those at work, and he's exposed to role models who role model professional and supportive kind of behavior and attitudes, that person is significantly less likely to engage in behavior that is sexist while at work.
So say that again. If he's sexist, he's less likely.
If he has these attitudes, he's significantly less likely to engage in that behavior if he has role models that role model professional behavior.
Oh, okay. I thought you were saying if he was in an environment where other people like that existed. So right. No. So what you're saying is that if he has people who are all about fair employment and advocating for championing everyone, irrespective of their gender, equal opportunity, everything like that.
Yeah.
He's not going to take those values to work.
And if they have consequences for bad behavior in that, if he hurts someone's feelings by saying that women shouldn't be in leadership positions, and there's a consequence for that he knows he's hurt someone's feelings and that he's made to say sorry or to write a letter of apology or something, then he's less likely to engage in that behavior in that workplace.
So are those kinds of predators likely to stay in environments like that, or are they likely to leave those environments?
Yeah, so in my view, if enough pressure is on that person to behave in an appropriate way, then that won't feel comfortable for them, that it won't meet their needs, and so they are more likely to leave that organization, I would say.
Rather than change?
Rather than change, yeah.
Wow.
Because a person's cognitive structure is stable across their lifetime. It takes a lot to change. The person has to really want to change and see the damage that they're doing. And that takes a lot of time and a lot of diminishment of ego.
That's so fascinating. We're getting into some very delicious territory here. So is this why bro cultures form?
Well, bro cultures to me are men relating to men in a masculine way.
I'd agree with that. And they tend to be just bros. Like, it's very difficult for a woman to get in there.
Yes, that's one of the things the research points to as well, is that gender, dominated workplace. So sexual harassment is more likely to occur in a male-dominated workplace. But when there's gender equality in leadership and in the organisation, it's less likely to occur.
Yeah, I saw so from the numbers that Kate Jenkins was talking about, and these numbers were from, I believe, 2017 or 2018. Mm-hmm. As I said, 39% of women and 29% of men experience sexual harassment, and the age is, you're most likely to be harassed between the ages of 18 and 29, and the harassers, 4 times out of 5 are men.
Yes, that's correct.
Which goes to your point about more male-dominated workplaces are going to be kind of the ground of where that kind of thing happened.
Yeah, and
go ahead.
And having more women in the organisation is kind of going to balance that out and reduce the likelihood of it occurring. I think because they bring a certain sensitivity to the gender, and they're the targets of it. So their experience is really vital in this whole kind of, and feeding that back to the organisation is really vital in this whole scenario.
I also think that if you tend to have women in leadership, they're just not going to put up with it. Like, if there's someone who is trying to assert themselves based on their maleness, I can tell you, as a woman who is a boss lady, I ain't going to fucking put up with that bullshit.
Totally.
I'm pretty sure you're not either, as a boss lady. And like, I love having men in an organization. I love I've had the whole gamut. I've had people that identify with all different kind of gender types. And the best scenario is always when there's balance. If it's ever like me as the boss lady and everyone else is men, it's really hard for me to manage all of that testosterone, because eventually everybody's like trying to dominate amongst each other to see who's going to be the alpha male above all of it. And I'm like, calm the fuck down, people. This is not okay. But what I have experienced is that when you do have that gender balance in there, it self-corrects. Like, it may tilt a little bit one way, it may tilt a little bit another way, but there's that self-correcting element that naturally occurs when you do have that balance.
Yep.
Yeah, awesome. What other definitions do we need to spell out?
Probably the only other one is gender harassment,
Mm-hmm.
which is about making jokes and sexist comments to women and to men as well.
What's an example of that, Samantha?
Sexist comments. I've got that women don't belong in leadership as an example.
Oh,
as
yeah.
a sexist kind of comment.
I'd tell you a great one that I used to get all the time about 2 years ago. You know that, how was it said? It's unfortunate that Elixir's not run by a man, because then everyone would take it seriously.
Oh, yes. Yeah, that's exactly the kind of thing that I'm talking about.
And,
so
and
that's
people kind of think
hostility.
that, and people expect that that's going to like make me feel better.
As
no,
if you're supposed
people
to go and get a man to be your boss.
Yeah, if Elixir, it's a shame that Elixir's not run by a man, because then people would take it seriously. It'd have a better chance of success. Like I got the whole gamut of all of it.
Yeah.
And so for those of you out there that is thinking like, how cool is it that Lee's like so crushing it with all of this stuff? Please remember that any of the women that you know that are in leadership positions had to navigate their way through a gauntlet of clusterfuckery to actually get there. And you don't want to hear our stories because it'll put you in a hole. Trust me. But we have to fight so much harder against this like wall of harassment that doesn't need to exist. Like, imagine if we could just do our jobs. We just want to do our jobs, and we want to do really well because we're capable of it. The hardest part about our jobs is not our jobs. The hardest part about our jobs is having to push up against this kind of bullshit. So, all right, let's talk about Philip Zimbardo.
Cool.
He's the man.
He did a really famous experiment in psychology. He was interested in power dynamics, but he was a psychologist and he worked at a university. And what he did was he created this experiment where a prison kind of scenario. So he got one group of males to be the prison guards, and he got one group of males to be the prisoners. And he tried to simulate prison as much as he could. His only instruction to the prison wardens was to not physically harm the prisoners. They weren't allowed to physically hurt the prisoners, but they were allowed to insult them, and they needed to keep control of the prison, as is their job as a prison warden. And so the prisoners were actually arrested, and on the day that the experiment started,
police went to their houses. They pulled them out. They arrested them in front of everybody. I watched the footage. It's fucking crazy.
And sent them to this room in the university that acted like the prison, and they were there for six days, because initially the people in the experiment, the guys in the experiment, they didn't really take the experiment too seriously. Day one was not really eventful, but as the days went on, the prison wardens and the prisoners as well really started to take on their roles, and really started to personify what they thought was expected of them in their roles. And there were hunger strikes, and there was taunting, there was verbal abuse, there was solitary confinement, and by day 6, the prisoners, there'd been, I think, a few people leave the experiment already, but by day 6 they had to call the experiment off because the prisoners were starting to be traumatized.
There was mimicked sexual I can't remember exactly what happened.
Okay.
Because they weren't allowed to physically hurt anyone, they mimicked some sort of sexual abuse and taunting.
Yeah.
And so if you listen to this and you want to see a really great talk by Philip Zimbardo, go check out his TED Talk, The Psychology of Evil. And he talks about the correlation between his experiment and what happened in Iraq with those soldiers who were under the exact same circumstances. They were not allowed. They were told they weren't allowed to hurt these prisoners of theirs, but by the end of it, they were doing all kinds of horrible shit to these people.
Yeah.
Dressing them up. Well, they did dress them up, but they stripped them down and made them do human pyramids while they were naked and bound.
Yeah.
They were doing a whole bunch of crazy stuff. And so tell us what went on from this experiment.
So this experiment, as in why this experiment's important?
Yeah.
So it's important because it speaks to how necessary it is to have a healthy environment, because it was deemed. So Philip Zimbardo's conclusions were that these prisoners, because of the environment that was set up, they were enacting the roles that were assigned to them. They were fulfilling the expectations that they believed were had of them. And it was the same for the prisoners. The prisoners became very withdrawn and apathetic. The ones that stayed were very withdrawn and apathetic, and they just kind of gave up. They just sat and just let the prison wardens kind of do whatever they wanted, basically. And they became very apathetic and withdrawn. And it speaks to how important the environment is, because people can be swayed and molded. Their behavior can be swayed and molded by the environment.
So are we saying that people surrender to the roles that are expected of them in a workplace if that culture is embedded deeply enough?
I wouldn't use the word surrender, but yes, you can definitely facilitate a certain response by creating a culture in the workplace. Yes.
Does that lend itself to virtue signaling as well?
I'm not sure what you mean by virtue signaling.
So, for example, if you have a workplace that's anti-male, and you expect your employees to be of it. So there's a cafe, I'm not going to say any names, but there's a cafe that charges a man tax.
Yes.
To make the point. I'm not a fan, for anyone who thinks that I'm onto this. I'm not a fan of this behavior, because I want to be really clear on something else. I don't like labels, so I don't call myself a feminist. I'm someone who's all about equality for everybody. Equal opportunity. I don't think equality of outcome is good. I think that that's communism. But equal opportunity is something that I'm staunchly a protector of. So when you turn around and you virtue signal to people by saying that we are going to have a man tax, I think that that's using exclusion as a mechanism for pretending that you're being inclusive. And that, to me, is horseshit. That never works. It's never going to achieve the actual outcome that you're looking to achieve. All you're doing there is man-shaming people and making people feel shameful for the gender that they identify with.
Yeah, I don't imagine that a man going into that cafe would feel very welcome there. So it kind of what we're trying to...
Right. And so what happens is they do, though. They go in there so that it's like I spoke to one guy who went in there and he said, I don't know, it was very strange. I went and I met a friend there and she wanted me to see this. And I kind of felt guilty. Like I had to pay the man tax because I was being shamed for being a man and earning more money. Like, what an interesting situation. This lends itself to what we were talking about before, where we're harassing people based on their gender. And that culture in that place, they ended up making it voluntary for men to pay the man tax.
Okay, yeah.
And so what they're doing there is they're virtue signaling people to be pro-women. And by being pro-women, you're almost anti-men, in a sense.
Yeah. Yes.
We don't want to be promoting that kind of stuff.
No.
At all. That's not going to get us the kind of equality that we are seeking for workplaces. And so I guess that when you're creating a culture where the concept of the cafe is heavily based on pointing out that men have more than women, you're virtue signaling to your staff. They have one male employee, and he is I believe he's an ex-prisoner, and he works there for free, and he is a staunch, they say he's a staunch believer of their mission. And I wonder if he is a staunch believer of their mission, or he has to be a believer of their mission.
Well, I wonder whether there's any kind of self-stigma there.
Tell me more.
Self-stigma as in disliking of himself
right.
and other males because of his experiences with violence or something else that, he might.
Right. Just because we're representing an important issue with the concept of the cafe that we're running, it doesn't necessarily mean that that's healthy.
Yeah. Or helpful for the cause in the long run, really. Like, I
agree.
Yeah, to include, but at the cost of excluding someone is, probably not the ideal way to go. We want to include everyone, and just because it's 4 out of 5 perpetrators that are male doesn't necessarily mean that we have to exclude, the
female perpetrators.
The female perpetrators as well.
Can we talk about them a little bit there? Because I hear from men that are saying to me whenever I am in a conversation about this thing, when am I supposed to see it as a woman being predatory towards me? Because like I've had women bosses who will like play with my hair or pat me on the ass when I'm doing a good job. Like that's not them being sexual predators. Like, how do you know that?
Yeah, exactly. It's I would use the feeling that you get after those behaviors is really important. That is what guides whether it's something to be intervened with or left alone. So
this is where it gets very grey, right?
Yeah.
Go ahead. So if after
that interaction, the person who's received the attention feels discomfort or like is questioning whether that should have happened, or in some way feels uncomfortable, then that's probably a sign that that kind of behaviour is not ideal in the workplace.
And where I have a problem with understanding that, because it sounds like a grey line, right? Because we don't, if we have people who take those extremes on different ends. I had a friend of mine who is an employer, and they had a celebration in the workplace, and they were, those party poppers, you pop them and then streamers come out of them. They had popped them in celebration of something, and his receptionist had some of the streamer in her hair. And so he was just helping her pull it out of her hair. And he had said to me that one of his, he thought afterwards, I wonder if now, and this is post Me Too, I wonder if now I've crossed a line. Is that a weird, like, am I now as the boss not allowed to do that? And I kind of counseled him saying, I just wouldn't do that. He said, but there was no intention there. And I said to him, let me give you a scenario how this plays out that probably would make you want to think twice about doing that again. And it's unfortunate. I'm a very handsy person. It's the wog in me, the Arab. Like we're always touching each other.
Yeah.
And I have to dial that back. You being Italian, right? Like it's all
you go
handsy,
over there.
right?
You go over there, and this is just the natural state of how you talk to someone.
Yeah. Everyone's holding hands. Yeah. Everyone's like touching each other on the face. Like all the boys are patting each other. It's a natural state of being. Yeah. But the scenario I was saying to my friends is, let me tell you how this could play out. 2 other women who observed that behavior are in the bathroom, and they say, hey, did you notice how the boss was taking the streamers out of what's her name's hair? Do you think there's something going on between them? And the other one never thought about it, but now she is. And so they then witness him doing that to somebody else, and they're like, oh my God, the boss is a predator. Where is this gray line that seems to exist where when we say it depends how the behavior makes you feel, because then somebody goes to that receptionist and says, are you okay? Like, we noticed that the boss was taking streamers out of your hair. Did you feel uncomfortable with that? And she was like, before that she didn't, because it was just a harmless act. But now she's thinking about, oh my God, was he actually coming on to me? And now all of a sudden she is starting to look at everything that he does differently.
Yeah.
And
she's starting to question it.
Right. And so this is this gray line that I'm starting to see everybody scared of. Everybody seems to be like, well, how the fuck do we act now? Yeah. Like, I'm a handsy woman. Okay. And I have completely stopped doing that. I've stopped touching people. And now if I'm training people, I ask permission to touch them to adjust the way that they are. Right. I feel very comfortable asking for that in the workplace.
Yes.
But no, none of us know now where the line is, especially in cafes where everyone's on top of everybody else. There's a clear line. We know you can't touch each other's boobs. Right? We know that that's not okay. You shouldn't touch another man's penis. You shouldn't do this, you shouldn't do that. But it's the subtle things.
And right? So can I just say that it's really awesome that you're starting to question this stuff. And it's really, really awesome that people are starting to acknowledge grey, because it's a really positive thing that people are starting to be aware and starting to ask the questions and starting to notice certain things. And it's only through that process that you will start to kind of decide what's appropriate for you, and as an organization, what's appropriate for your organization. There's always going to be things that are clear cut. There's always going to be behaviors, sexual harassment behaviors, and conversations that are clear-cut not okay. And there's always going to be certain situations where some people feel it's okay and some people don't feel it's okay. And
what do we do then?
Well, I think the person's internal response to that should be acknowledged, and a real driver of whatever kind of consequences need to happen, or whatever kind of actions need to happen. And organisationally, if there is a grey kind of issue that comes up, all the parties need to be consulted, and it needs to be something needs to be decided on that feels comfortable for everyone.
Okay, so I'm a big fan of Brené Brown.
Yes.
And a lot of her work around shame and guilt and all of that kind of stuff. And I think, and vulnerability. And in particular, I've been paying a lot of attention to her work around shame at the moment in regards to this issue, because when somebody says to me, I found out that one of the guys that was working for me has been talking in inappropriate ways to my staff. Now, knowing Brené Brown's work around shame and the fact that shame isn't helpful for anything. You know, shame is like the rock bottom of the way that you want to treat someone if you want to put them in a hole, like emotionally, right?
Totally.
So I'm always looking for other ways to help people help themselves than going and shaming parties that have done something that's inappropriate, because I don't think that you're going to achieve a really great outcome for everyone there. And that should be the goal. Like perhaps a predator isn't hyper aware of his predatory behavior, and until he's made aware of that.
Yes.
Can you talk about that they're often not?
So in the work that I've done with sexual offenders, they're often not aware that they have a need and they're trying to fulfill a need. They don't have a concept. They have justified their behavior in their head in a certain way, and they're often acting unconsciously. I would say it's not a conscious process for them, and it's not that they're consciously choosing to do certain things. They tend to just act out things.
Is that because of conditioning? Is that because of the environment they were raised around? Is that what is that?
So the model that we use to understand sexual offending, so I'm talking about people who commit crimes in this area, is that these offenders aren't able to get their needs met in a healthy way, so they have to resort to these offending kind of behaviors in order to get certain needs met. And whether those needs are connection based or sexual based or anything else, that's the kind of model that we use to understand that behavior currently.
Have you heard of incels?
No.
Okay, incels are a new group of men that are forming.
Yeah.
And I want to be clear, they're a minority of people. This is not a majority it's not a huge group of men, but it's definitely, there's a hashtag that exists for it. They are a group of men that do exist. Incel stands for involuntary celibates. And what they're finding is that the men in the extreme end of these things are resorting, they believe that it is women's fault that they're not getting laid. And so what they're doing is they're going out and like driving vans into groups of women to release their rage on the female world because they aren't able to get laid. And Jordan Peterson's doing a lot of work with trying to help these kinds of people, in the sense that, like, he's saying to them, like, instead of being an asshole, how about becoming the kind of man that is worthy of being in a great relationship, so that you can change your situation rather than lashing out at people who have nothing to do with why you're not getting laid. It's not women's fault that you're not getting laid. It's your fault that you're not getting laid. But hey, wait, stop. There's a way to change that. And it's this kind of behavior that ends up when it gets into the workplace, that can be a real problem. And so when, going back to my thing about Brené Brown, when people do come to me and say that this behavior has happened, a lot of the time when I've had to deal with that kind of thing of being the mediator between the person if I'm in the leadership position, pretty much every single time, the guy's completely shocked that they're being accused of this thing. They don't see it, that this is how they are. And now I would question if shaming is the right way to go about it, because from what Brené's research shows is that it's not necessarily the most effective way to receive an outcome that helps him step into ownership and helps her be heard. Can you speak to that a little bit and what your thoughts are around that?
So I think when an issue of sexual harassment comes up in the workplace, it's really important to be respectful of both sides. Because, as you say, the perpetrator might not be aware that they've hurt someone's feelings, or that someone is really upset or really affected by something that they've done. And initially, especially if you have a decent if you have a decent culture within your organization and you've employed good people, they good people do make mistakes. If you have good relationships with these people, they might be going through a hard time. You don't know what the perpetrator's or the offender's situation is. He might be going through a hard time. He might have tried to lighten the mood and tried to make a joke that was really offensive to someone. Inappropriate. He might not, that person might have just not reacted to the joke. And so he thought he made a bad joke.
Okay.
And that's
so that's one situation.
That's one situation. And speaking to both parties separately in a really respectful way can often elicit information that you need to make a decision about what to do.
So should you speak to them separately and then together? Okay.
I would. I would the target. So I don't like the word victim.
I'm with you on that.
Yeah, I feel like it puts the target in a powerless kind of role. Yep. But I like the word target better. It's really important to validate the target. So to validate that what they've experienced is not okay, and to, in that process, kind of say that from an organizational point of view, we don't think that this is a good thing that's happened and we'll be dealing with it accordingly, and kind of give the target or the person that's experienced this harassment some kind of assurance as well. The research says that that's really important, that the targets get some kind of assurance that they've done the right thing in coming forward, that they won't experience any negative consequences as a result of coming forward and reporting their experiences. And the other one, and that their complaint is taken seriously, and that the offenders will be, or the offender will be spoken to as well, and a course of action will be decided upon.
And how does go ahead?
And then you speak to the offender and elicit what information you need to. It's really hard to kind of generally speak because they can have lots of different reactions. They can become really defensive and say, "Oh, it wasn't me," or completely deny it, or they can really take responsibility and feel really bad that they hurt someone's feelings. And both of those scenarios would be handled differently, I would imagine.
Can we talk about how you'd handle those two separate situations?
Sure. So in the situation that someone would take full responsibility and feel bad that they have created shame in another individual, and even shame in themselves, I think I would be willing to kind of, I would get them both in a room and say, this is the offender's reaction. Would a kind of an apology or an apology letter or something like that suffice? He's really sorry that he's hurt your feelings and he's created all this distress. He's created distress for you. How do you feel about that?
Mm-hmm. And does the target need to be the person who drives that process?
So they need to make so in an organization, I read this on the internet as well. It's important to have a really personable kind of person within the leader, within your organization, the workplace, to report these kinds of things to.
Should it be the same as the boss, or should it be different from the boss? Or is that dependent?
Really, no. It depends how large your organization is, I suppose.
Mm-hmm.
Someone who has good connections with the employees and their co-workers, and gets along with most people and is able to handle kind of a difficult situation, has the capacity to kind of think about these things logically and the compassion to kind of respond sensitively to these issues, but also the kind of objectivity to be able to not rush into kind of, oh, this person did this and this and this, and they're such a bad person kind of attitude.
Or the other end, which is like, no, that person could never possibly have done that. He's a good guy. I'd never believe.
Yeah, exactly. So be objective about these kinds of problems in the workplace. And whether that's the boss or not, I'm not sure.
Yep. And that needs to be something that, you know, if the boss is never there, then having the boss be the person that everyone reports to about this kind of stuff is ridiculous.
Yes,
but totally. You know, that's for the workplace to decide, I think.
Yes, very much so.
And so what about the scenario where the offender is denying that they did anything? How does that conversation between whoever the person in the middle is and the offender go?
Yeah, so I'd say something like mate.
Mate. Everything that starts with mate is already going to be. If you're American or from anywhere but Australia or New Zealand or the UK, go ahead and use the word mate and it will get you everywhere you need to get to. Trust us. We use it in Australia all the time.
Yeah, totally. You're on the same page. You're making yourself on the same page as the person. There's no power dynamic there. Yeah. There's no I'm better than you. We're equal, and we're having this conversation as equal. Doesn't matter what my position is, and it doesn't matter what your position is. You're my mate.
Absolutely. You say it so Australian. I love it, mate.
Okay, so we've had. So I thought about this yesterday. I would have the target, I would ask whether the target wants to remain anonymous or not. And
that's an interesting perspective.
Yeah, I don't really know. I haven't thought that through.
Yep.
Or what effect that would have on the process. And it depends on the severity of the complaint or the harassment that's been spoken about. But I just wondered about anonymity. But we're
going to talk a little bit more about that because that is exactly what led you to be on this podcast.
Okay, cool. So you have some ideas on that. So I would say to the offender, we've had this person come forward and say that you perhaps unknowingly, I don't know what the situation is, and that's what I'm here to talk to you about. We've had this person come and say that you did this and this and this. They've got this evidence to show. I want to know what you think of this and what happened in your eyes. And if they say, I don't know, if they completely deny everything, then you say, well, mate, I have this evidence. Like, it's pretty clear what's gone on here. She's really distressed. She doesn't feel like coming to work anymore. She can't be, in the same room as you because she feels like she wants to cry. This is pretty serious for us, and it doesn't seem like nothing has gone on. What do you think about that? And just keep going at him until he might cave.
Mm-hmm.
And then if he caves, then you say, I understand that whatever, I don't know, he caves. If he caves, then you say, thanks for being honest. And
so you recognize that it's important to recognize him.
Yeah, and celebrate his honesty.
Mm-hmm.
Or her honesty, because that's quite a brave thing to do after you've said, no, it didn't happen. And then just work on mediation, like some kind of consequence for the behaviour. So the research says that appropriate consequences might be a demotion, a transfer, a suspension for a certain period, a period of probation, or even dismissal, depending on the severity of the complaint. If it's not too severe, I also thought of like taking the person off their usual duties and doing something a little less kind of
Sexy,
yes,
you know, instead of
dishwashing
making
or
them barista,
something.
dishwashing. Yeah.
Yeah, for a period of time.
What's the likelihood that an offender would lash out at the target?
So that's a really good point. Their target's rights really need to be protected. Their confidentiality really needs to be protected if they really desire that, because of the shame that's involved and because of the distress that they can experience. They really do need to be protected, and the organisation needs to even offer some contribution to counselling if that's appropriate. And even some, I don't know, like some time off to be able to process.
What's happened?
Yes, and I also read that if an investigation is necessary, that that both parties kind of take time off, and that one party be reimbursed for their time off if they weren't at fault in any way.
Yeah, wow. I mean, this stuff can really damage a person psychologically, right? Can you talk a little bit about what kind of damage, what that takes?
Yes.
Because
So I had one particular client who I gave her a diagnosis of PTSD because of a case of sexual harassment in the workplace. When she first came to me, she was shaking uncontrollably. It took her so much to be able to drive to my appointment. She was in tears on the way. Her workplace was on the way out of town, and there's only one way into and out of town, and it's past the workplace where the incident happened. She was incredibly distressed. She couldn't eat. She couldn't sleep. She kept having flashbacks of the incident. She was incredibly distressed.
that's so unfortunate that happens. And the worst part about it is it happens so often. And I think that's the real, the great thing that the Me Too movement has exposed is that men are so shocked at how often and how many women that this actually happens to. All of my male friends said, I was so surprised to find out that it happens to so many of you. Like, well, I don't know a woman that it hasn't happened to. Not a single woman, not one single woman do I know that hasn't had, at the very least, one, but I don't know anyone who's only had it happen to them once. So it becomes difficult to deal with.
Totally.
I don't want it to become normal. Go ahead.
Yeah, it's very distressing for the target. It can be, depending on the severity, obviously, but it can be very distressing.
I feel as though for those of us who grew up around certain ethnic environments, it's more acceptable to dismiss certain behaviors as nothing. And we don't see it as sexual harassment because we've just witnessed all the men do it our whole lives, right?
Yeah.
And it's not until you start to think about this that you're like, you're being a pig. Stop it. So when we're on the receiving end of it, before we get to that point where we're like, I don't like this, it's more like, oh, he's just being a dick. I don't like it, but that's just how all men are.
Yeah, and it's easy to dismiss. But as a business owner, you want to be aware of it, because if the culture goes too far, you can increase the risk of having a more severe incident on your hands. So sexual harassment in the workplace starts with the gender harassing kind of conversations that we talked about. And I think if you're a manager those need to be your red flags, and you need to be jumping on those kind of situations and just letting people know that that's not what your organization stands for, and that's not what people in your workplace expect. That's not how you're expected to behave. And can you please stop those kinds of discussions, or stop making those requests, or stop doing that, whatever behavior they're engaging in. Make simple requests that are clear but firm. And you really need to be jumping on those early kind of conversations to prevent the more severe kind of sexual harassment.
Can a culture turn if you allow a bad egg in amongst it? So if you have kind of like got a good balance in a workplace, and I'm thinking about Philip Zimbardo's work and the Lucifer effect from Stanley Milgram, whereby you've got people who are seemingly harmless, but they're being instructed. Let's say you get a new manager in a workplace and he's the new leader so that the cafe owner can like manage the other cafe that they're about to open. You get someone who is unknowingly predatory, and they come in and they start telling other people how they can and cannot act. Can that shift the culture in a workplace?
Yes, if they're in a position of power, yes. If they themselves are exhibiting or not seeing deviant behavior as a problem,
right?
Not seeing sexually deviant behavior as a problem, and by behavior I mean words as well. If they're not seeing that as a problem, then they're encouraging that in the workplace and making it more likely that you're going to have an incident in your workplace. Yes.
So let's talk about. Go ahead.
They're going to. I've got it here. They're going to enable, facilitate, or encourage sexual harassment. And the opposite is also true. That if you have a positive role model, a positive manager that models positive behavior and intervenes and calls deviant behavior for what it is, and asks for it not to occur in the workplace, and expects that it's not going to occur in the workplace, and when it does, they set consequences for that behavior. When they do that, then it's less likely that they're going to have sexual harassment in their workplace.
Because predators are going to naturally no longer be stimulated in that workplace, and they're going to go and find somewhere else to work.
Yes. And when their behavior, this is a principle in psychology, that when you punish a behavior, it's less likely to occur in the future. So if you set a negative consequence for deviant behavior, it's less likely to occur in the future.
Do you have to tell the person that they're being punished? Or because, for example, if you just happen to cut that person's shift without explaining to them that this is happening as a consequence of your behaviors, is it as effective? Or do you need to help them draw the association between those two things?
They need to learn, and they need to know the association and the connection. They need to link it to their behavior so that they understand that that's the reason why. And that will be the thing that makes them less likely to do it in the future.
Are there any laws? Go ahead.
It does. If they're like a psychopath, for example, and they don't care what your consequences are, they will keep doing it just because that's who they are, and that's how they interact with the world. But that kind of person is more likely to leave because they don't really fit in your organization. You're putting too much pressure on them to change, and that's not comfortable for them.
What about with sociopaths? Is that the same kind of thing? I mean, they have
these are really severe and rare kind of people.
Dude, I've met more.
I've
met more sociopaths in coffee than anywhere in my fucking life, to be honest with you. And sociopaths and dominant narcissists. They're in coffee, right? Oh yes, absolutely.
Yeah.
But what do you do in those situations where people just think like? There's an argument that I heard from one person who is doing this, and he says, "But she wanted it. Like, look at me. Of course, she wanted it."
Yeah. Yeah, so that's his own kind of cognitive bias, I would say, towards
You think?
himself. His own grandiose ideas of who he is.
At that time, thank God I had been listening to a lot of Brene Brown stuff, because the response to me would have been much more severe than it was, and I would have said something like, "Bro, I am looking at you, and you're not doing nothing for me." That would have been absolutely inappropriate to say, because I would have shamed the shit out of him. But just in moments like that, you're like, you want to bring someone down a couple of pegs so that they can understand your behavior has made her feel ashamed of herself.
Yeah. And look, you can say it in those terms. Like, that's a perfectly acceptable way. Like, you had a big impact on that person, then that's not okay.
We've talked about, like, let's talk about what the targets tend to feel in these kinds of experiences. You know, shame is, I hear that again and again and again. I have been contacted by women who have been raped in our industry. I have been contacted by women who have been physically, sexually assaulted by men. There was no penetration, but they were absolutely unwarranted kissing, unwarranted feeling up. You know, and this was like horrible drunken behavior that's happened. And this idea that, you know, you can hide, "Oh, bro, I was drunk and, you know, I didn't really mean it," etc., etc. Drunk or not, you're still responsible for your own behavior. And so what are some of the things that you hear the targets again and again say that
it's
they
their
feel
fault?
Mm-hmm.
That it's their fault, that they put themselves in that situation, and that they're to blame, when I don't think that's the case at all. They often, it depends again on the severity of the situation, but they are, in the case of more severe sexual harassment and abuse, they are led to feel a certain way in the person's company. So they're led to feel comfortable and safe and even special sometimes. And then they're taken advantage of.
Is that grooming?
Yes.
Let's talk a little bit about grooming at some point too, because I first became accustomed with that word when I was listening to the Michael Jackson stuff. This idea of grooming behavior.
Yeah, that's more severe kind of abuse. Yeah.
Yeah, but grooming is definitely plays a role in some of this stuff, doesn't it? In the workplace, if somebody's made to feel special, if they do certain things for a manager, particularly if there's a culture of like, "Oh, let's go out for drinks after work every day."
Yeah, they can be, definitely. It is again the more severe end. So the research says that it doesn't happen as often, but yes, it's the much more distressing end of the scale, where the targets feel like it's their fault. They, even after a sexual kind of unwanted sexual experience, the targets can often feel dirty. That's a really common kind of
dirty, like ashamed dirty, or
no, dirty as even physically dirty, like they just need to get in the shower and wash it all off.
Yeah.
Or just clean themselves, like cleanse themselves. And dirty in the sexual sense as well. Yeah, but then there's a lot of anxiety, there's shame, there's depression, there's I'm a bad person. Sometimes if they have to keep it a secret, then even there's more shame and more distress associated with that. And that's quite a burden to carry for the victims or the targets.
For anyone, for anyone listening to this isn't like toughen up, sunshine, get the fuck over it. This is not one of those situations. No. You know, you not being able to deal with when you're getting slammed in a coffee rush, that's a toughen up, sunshine, learn how to get over this shit. This kind of behavior, this is not that situation. Nobody should be made to feel this kind of discomfort for this reason in the workplace.
Absolutely. And yeah. They also feel a desire to leave the workplace.
Yeah, wow. And so do
they're
they
not
do the
productive either. Yeah, they're not
does
able to concentrate because they're so anxious and they've got so much going on in their head that it's just, yeah, they don't feel comfortable and they can't be in the present moment enough to kind of do their job properly.
so when an employee goes from being someone who's vibrant and excited to being someone who is expressing these kinds of new behaviors where they're very quiet and not as productive, they tend to shy away a little bit more than they used to. Is
Yep.
that something that should be an indicator for an employer to
Definitely.
pull them aside
Yep, and
and
have a
say what's
coffee with
happened?
them, take them for a walk. Yep. What's going on? Are you okay? Is there something going on in work? Is there something going on outside of work? I'm here to support you anytime you need. Yeah, just give me a chat and be really approachable for them.
So the reason you're on this podcast is because you heard one of the Daily Coffee Pros and you heard me talking about a particular unnamed individual who I know has been doing some horrible things over the years. I know because women have come forward to me. And when I've spoken to other people about him in the industry, it seems to have been this open secret. And I was warned in the way that I speak about it to be very careful because he's ridiculously rich and he's being invited back onto the board of the company that he sold originally, and that he would not hesitate to sue me for defamation. And you kindly reached out and you said that if we could find a way, like the best way forward is having the victims, the people who were targeted over the years, having them come forward is a more constructive way of moving forward, because it could really be a big detriment to me to do something like this. But if we had some way for them to come forward, even if it was not publicly, like they just came forward and mentioned something to the board, either in a written letter where they were either signed it or whatever, and we gave those accounts to the board. My big concern about why this is important is because putting a man in a situation, putting anybody that is a known offender back in a situation where he is going to be around new women that he can groom. And because that was how he did it, he would promote young women in positions. He would promote them well before they were ready to be promoted, so that they felt special and so that they felt like he was nurturing their future paths, and that they were, important to the organization, and he had their best interests at heart. That's grooming, right?
Yes, I would call that grooming. Yeah.
Then what he would do is he would take them on work vacations, work trips, and he would do unspeakable things to them.
Okay.
And this really sits heavy on my heart because I can't do anything about it.
Well, you are. You can't do anything for those particular people that were hurt by this person. You're speaking to these people, and you are letting them know that it's not okay. You're validating their distress, and it might feel like you're not doing anything, but for them to just be able to come and speak to someone about these issues is doing something.
It's doing one thing, but I also feel complicit in the fact that the motherfucker is going to end up back in his job, and he's going to have the opportunity to do something else. And so for that reason, it sits heavy on my heart that I might be complicit in that situation when I can't just walk up to him, rip his heart out of his chest and feed it to him with a spoon,
Yeah. Yeah, and these situations do happen. That's the way of the world, unfortunately. These kind of offenders are out there, and they are preying. They're everywhere. They're in our workplaces, they're in our churches, they're in our schools, they're in our families, they're everywhere, yes.
So what do we,
Unfortunately.
I found out that there was a media organization that knew about this behavior. So I picked up the phone and called the owner of that magazine. And when I said to him, this was the second incident, 2 different humans that were associated with this magazine. And so I picked up the phone, called the owner and said, listen, we need to have another uncomfortable conversation. And I told him, so listen, are you aware? I've been made aware that you're aware that this is what's going on. And he's like, listen, Lee, I don't want to fucking talk about it. What this person does is his business. If he does it, he does it. If he doesn't do it, he doesn't do it. I can't control the man. We all know that he's doing it, but what can I do about it? That's what I want to talk to you about. That's it right there. What can we do about it? Because I feel helpless and I don't know the man, but these other men who do know him and they know that it's going on, what can they do?
Oh, this is a tough one.
It's a massive question, but we've got to talk about it.
Yeah, totally. Totally. It's a hard one. It's a hard one. As a man to man, equal to equal, it's a hard conversation to have, especially with someone who is influential and has a lot of status and money. It's a very difficult conversation to have, and I can understand a lot of people's unwillingness to do so. Even for the victims to come forward.
I can't ask that of them. They've experienced such a massive trauma by this human. I cannot, this many years later, some of them it's been 15 years.
Wow. Yeah. Yeah.
That's how long he's been doing this.
Yeah. 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 I would have to say I don't know, because it's such a complex situation. I would have to say I don't know.
I don't think any of us do yet.
Really hard.
It's one of those situations where we're all just learning how to have these conversations now. And it's why I wanted to have this conversation with you live on the air, so that it becomes a little less stigmatized to talk about this out loud.
Yeah, yeah. I do have one thought to share, though.
Please do.
It's really important to focus on what we can do, and to I believe to and that's not to say we can't, we shouldn't tackle these more difficult situations. It's important to talk about them, and it's really good that you're raising awareness and that you're speaking about this. But I think it's also really important to within our own organizations and where we can have influence, to make sure that we do have influence, and to make sure that we are having the difficult conversations where we can. And this is what we're doing today. We're talking about something difficult, but a difficult situation, but it's, I think, really important that we don't get overwhelmed by what we can't do, and where we can't have where we can't have an influence, but to recognize and to celebrate where we are having an influence, and to make sure we continue to do that work and to focus on that work, because it's only by doing that work really well that we're then going to be able to tackle these more difficult kind of yucky situations, I think.
With the Me Too movement making men more aware that this goes on, I think there's definitely a positive that I've seen, in that men say to me, you should just tell more men when you know of these situations, so that men can stand in and do something about it.
Yeah.
And I love that, except we have a new kind of a new kind of buffer in that, whereby they say, but how do we know that this person is telling the truth if she won't even come forward and make a police report and put her name to it? Can she really be trusted?
Yes. It's okay, to experience sexual harassment and to make a police report are two very, very different things.
Mm-hmm.
It is very, very difficult to make a police report, and the sexual harassment, depending on severity again, can really, and a person's resilience and their response to it can really, really affect someone. It can, and I've seen it, it can make someone suicidal, and you don't want someone who is suicidal doing a police report, because it will just increase their distress.
So tell us what's tough about the police report for those people who have never, and I've never experienced it. Tell us why it's so traumatic.
Because you have to relive everything, and be questioned and questioned and questioned, and describe a lot of detail in a police report, so that the police know absolutely everything that went on. They know your recollection, and they will judge how reliable your recollection is, and how good, how they'll judge the quality of your evidence, and whether or not they're likely to get a conviction out of the evidence that you present.
So not only is the target, whether it be a man or a woman, or someone who's doesn't identify with a gender, whoever the target is, not only are they feeling ashamed and all of those other things that are associated, now they're being judged by somebody as to the validity of their accusation.
And it's quite a rigorous kind of process. They need a lot of detail, and it's quite lengthy, and you're forced to relive it. So you're in that shame, you're in that experience, you're being that victim all over again in your mind. You're recreating that experience for yourself to give the evidence, so that they can then decide whether it's good evidence and whether there's enough to be able to chase a conviction. And they might, after that process, I've been involved in a case with a child where there was alleged sexual abuse, and the child reported to the police, and they went through the process. And there was never a case, because the evidence was not reliable enough to get a conviction. But
and then you put that child back into the same situation?
So no, he ended up moving to a different country.
Which is traumatic. Let me tell you, as someone who's moved to another country under good circumstances, that's traumatic enough.
Yeah. So mum was from a different country, so they moved back to her supports. Yeah.
Wow. I keep hearing men tell me another case whereby there was a situation, a woman came forward to me, and this was pretty much the first time I felt like I could do anything about it. So she had come forward to me. She told me what happened. I asked her who it was. She told me. I went and found him on Facebook, friended him, tried to friend his wife. Couldn't find her, but I found his son. And then I sent him a friend request. He accepted it immediately. And this guy was, again, a known predator in the coffee industry. And I sent him a Facebook message, and I copied a number of men who were well known in the coffee industry that were Facebook friends of mine and his. And I told him what I had been told. And I told him that I knew exactly, I had sought validation from a number of women it had happened to. And that if I ever found out that he had approached other women again, I would make his name public. And his son was copied in on the message as well. So once he received it, he exited the conversation. But the conversation that went on after that was from a lot of the men that were very complimentary. They said, look, Lee, we know it's very brave of you to do this. It's not fucking brave of me. What's brave is those women who came forward and said something to me. That's what's brave here. What came after that was, but are you sure that these women are telling the truth? We're not saying that they're not, but are you sure that these women are telling the truth? I don't know what to do about that.
Occasionally you do get, I've worked in a case where, and this wasn't in the workplace, but this was in a family situation where the daughter did accuse the father of sexual abuse, and it wasn't true, and that devastated the whole family for a number of years.
Of course.
Occasionally, I would say I've come across that kind of scenario, but overwhelmingly, no. If your indicators are, if the person is emotional when they're talking about their experience, if it's really affected them and they haven't done a lot of work on how their trauma or their experience has affected them, they will get shaky. They will get tears welling up in their eyes. They will, the emotion will be there. You will see that on their face. And it's really sad that women have to, and even men, I guess it would happen to, would happen to, that they have to defend themselves. Not only do they have to go through this trauma, but they have to
re-traumatize, right?
Yeah.
Every time they talk about it.
Yeah, well, it does get easier. As you talk about it, it does get easier. And that's one of the advantages of talking about it. Avoiding it makes it harder to deal with in the long run.
Okay.
And you get into all kinds of unhelpful ways of managing the emotional distress that comes with the trauma if you avoid it for a long time. So talking about it is important, and it does get easier, but it's really sad that people have to defend, not only experience the distress and have the experience, but defend the validity of what they're saying.
So what is it about, if we talk about the anonymity side of that, so when they're saying, like, how can we believe them? There seems to be this association with, well, if they're telling the truth, well, then why don't they report it? And why won't they talk about it publicly? Because if it really happened, what do they have to hide behind with their anonymity? And this is something that I keep hearing again and again and again. And I do want to talk about this anonymity thing, as you raised before, because there seems to be this association between shame and well, the self-shame that people are feeling when this has happened to them, and them somehow protecting themselves with their anonymity, like going to their boss and saying, look, this happened to me, but I don't want them to know that I told you.
Yeah. And look, sometimes that can be a really valid request because the person is a bit of a bully. And so by reporting the experience of sexual harassment, their fear is that they will get some kind of retaliation from the offender or the offender's friends. And that's quite a valid concern. And it's and I think organizationally, protection of the target is really important in that kind of scenario. And anonymity, I suppose, is a strategy that will help protect the target in that situation.
Won't they go on a hunting fest then, though? Are they not likely?
And then they start. Yeah. And the way to reduce shame is to lay everything out on the table. So to completely claim your experience and to kind of get the validation from other people that you need, and ultimately give it to yourself. Yeah, give
by
it to
owning what the experience and naming it out loud and talking about it.
It can be very uplifting and relieving for a lot of people. Yeah, laying it out like that.
What are some of the I want to talk about Four Barrel, because that seems to be like the Harvey Weinstein of our industry. That situation, when this kind of behavior is systemic in an organization or in a workplace, can the organization change when it's been that way from leadership for a long time? Hold on, I should give some context. For anyone listening that doesn't know, Four Barrel had a situation. There were 3 owners of the company. One of them was accused and found of a whole bunch of stuff, of a sexual abuse, a sexual harassment and abuse nature. I believe the abuse was there. He was taken out of the company. The company was left with the 2 owners. They hired Harvey Weinstein's PR agency to try and deal with that. They advised them to change the name of the company. Then they hired another publicist who told them that that wasn't the best way to go about it, change it back to Four Barrel and proceed with changing the culture. Now, the 2 owners that were there had said, I'm sure I'm going to get into a fuck ton of trouble for talking about this, but I'm fine with it. The 2 owners that were left had said that they knew nothing about it, which I believe is absolute horseshit. The industry at large knew about it. I wasn't here at the time. I didn't know that this was going on in Four Barrel, and I didn't have a podcast. Otherwise, I would have happily spoken about it then. But the 2 owners that were remaining said that they didn't know anything about it and that they were going to change the culture in the business. And they brought in this other publicist to come in and help them change the culture within the business. I'm not talking about this through secondhand knowledge. I had an association with the second publicist that was hired, just so everyone knows that I'm not making any of this up, and decided not to work with that publicist because she was representing Four Barrel. We were going to work with her for Elixir. She in herself is a great woman who's done a lot of really good shit for a lot of businesses. I think this was a poor choice of her to represent this company. I think Four Barrel should have just burned to the ground after what had happened, and they should have just started another company, because I believe that that's rewarding and shitty behavior. I need you to tell me why I'm wrong.
Because why should everyone else be punished for that guy's mistakes? Because
it wasn't just him. He was festering a culture that was there.
Yeah, he was.
And the consequence of that is, so his business owners, his business partners had to have known this was going on. And they didn't stop it because they were just cashing the checks. They were just making all of this fucking money off the back of, they were cleaning up as a company. They were making loads of money. And they were happy to look the other way because he was running a really great business, apparently.
Yeah.
And I just don't think that we can reward that. I'm somebody who hates to see businesses fail. I think we should try and you came to the workshop for cafe owners. You were there. You can see how big an advocate I am for good businesses surviving and the right people running good businesses. I'm also an advocate for making sure that people who shouldn't be running businesses shouldn't run businesses until they're ready to run businesses, because it's hugely emotionally taxing running a business. And if you don't know how to do it and you haven't got the skills to actually carry the burdens of the anxiety and depression and stress that comes with running a business, then you shouldn't do it. So to my mind, and perhaps this is me being the ultimate bitch here, but And I'm fine with owning that, because I think that these people turned a blind eye to what was going on for the sake of their pockets. Maybe that's the case. Maybe that's not the case.
Yeah,
but there has to be a reason.
We don't know. Yeah.
Right. So they may have been doing that. They may not have been doing that. Either way, because of their lack of duty of care, a number of women had to suffer at the behest of that. And that's why I think that we shouldn't be, I think that's why that this business should burn to the ground. It's a representative of something that is such an ugly stain on our industry. And I don't, and maybe this is the ultimate bitch in me, which it's only in these situations that the bitch in me ever comes out, because I'm actually a really nice person. I know not a lot of people believe that. But
when people are hurt.
When people are hurt, I am like,
the mother in you comes
absolutely,
out. The lioness.
Absolutely, yes. The lioness in me is like coming at you, and I'm going to fuck you up in the worst way I can. But people were hurt, people that you had no fucking right to hurt, people you had no right to traumatize, people you had no right to affect the rest of their life. And you know what? This guy that did that is opening up another coffee company. He's opening up another fucking coffee company. And that's why I think these owners, if they were to like somehow fix this and fix the issue of sexual harassment in the workplace, and then they end up being like a success story about this, fuck you.
Yeah, I don't necessarily have that kind of attitude. No. I think it's absolutely appalling that people were hurt and that women were subjected to the behavior. I don't necessarily have a judgment around whether or not business that the what's left should remain and be successful. Like,
yeah, and I get that. Like, I'm one of these people who there should be a path for redemption. I am a big fan of that. This is just not one of those situations.
Fair enough.
I don't want to see heads on spikes or anything like that.
Yeah.
But that would be like saying, like, all these people that enabled Harvey Weinstein, like, we should forgive them for what they did because, they had to like run their lives and cash their checks. And what else could they do? What the fuck do you mean? What else could
work for the guy? Yeah,
exactly.
Yeah,
like, don't enable the behavior. You knew what was going on.
Have you heard Selma Hayek talk about working with Harvey Weinstein?
No. What did she say?
She said that she did work with him, and it was because he was such an awesome person. He was, because of his skill, he was so good at what he did, but because of the way she carried herself, he didn't try anything too distressing on her. And she said that that's because of her attitude and her strength of character. Mm-hmm. But she felt ashamed, and she hadn't talked about it for years until it came out in the press. And even then she found it difficult to talk about and was quite anxious and worried and distressed, and had a whole kind of process around being honest and writing about it in an article that she did. It was quite distressing for her.
That must be difficult, knowing that it's going on and feeling okay because it didn't happen to you, but knowing that it's happening to other people and not being able to do anything about it.
Yeah. And like ashamed because of that as well, because she got off lightly, really. But she had shame around actually working with him as well and utilizing his skills.
I can understand why she would. Yeah. I mean, me in that situation, I just wouldn't have anything to do with him.
Mm.
But clearly I'm a bitch. We've established that one.
No, I don't like that word.
I'm using it about myself, so it's okay. I would never use that about somebody else. I have a clear disdain for that word, but then when the tyrant it's not the tyrant, it's the lioness in me comes out about that. I feel so helpless about this situation.
Yeah, and that's where it comes from. That's where your emotion comes from. That's where the helplessness is, that vulnerability
Yep.
that Brene Brown talks about, that is then transformed into anger, and I need to do something about this. I need to help.
Yep. Yeah. And I want to, I'm not saying I want to help in a way where I'm going to give the industry all the solutions. I don't have that. I don't have any of that. The way that I want to help here is by stepping into my vulnerability and finding strength in that by helping us all start conversations. Because to me, that's the only way that we're going to get anywhere with this. In, you know, when you look at the way that this industry is moving, there's a lot to be worried about right now. You know, the C market dropped below 90 cents today.
Isn't that terrible? Oh, below 90 cents.
Dude, my housemate watched me yesterday go into a panic. She's like, what the fuck are you got? What's wrong? And I watch it every morning before I post it, because we post it every day. You know, you see it on Instagram. And I just watched it go from 94 to 90 yesterday. She's like, are you all right? I said, no, I'm not. Coffee farmers around the world are going to have to uproot their coffee trees and plant something else. Coffee one day will become a commodity product. It will become, it will become a luxury item. And I've got so much anxiety about it. And then I woke up this morning and the first thing I saw was 89.4, and then it dropped to 89.25. And I'm like, what the fuck is going on? That was my reaction. Oh, it was that. I'm like, oh my God.
How much more do they have to cop?
It's so stressful because we can't do anything about it. And we can't do anything about it quickly. We can't. I mean, the market looks at this and says, awesome, this is a great time to take advantage of buying coffee. Because they don't care. You know, no, the market being the stock, the shareholders, sorry, the stock market. People who are buying shares are like, yes, let's trade on these futures. It's like, no, this is like, should be shorting this shit if you need to make money. And then at the same time, like, this is terrifying. You are putting the whole long-term viability of our supply chain at dire risk. This is going to go one way. Once it hits rock bottom, it's going to go up, and who knows how high up it's actually going to go. And that's going to affect so much. And it's you know, that, so between that I can't fix, and this sexual harassment issue that I can't fix. And let's be really clear, like, I don't have a savior complex at all. I want to see conversation around this, because we can't save any of it. We can't fix any of it right now. What panics me is that the dismissiveness, you know, people are like, it's not really a big deal, right? Yes, it's a big deal, because coffee farmers are not getting paid what they need, which means that they're going to end up impoverished. It means that they're probably going to have to restart or sell. It means that these people won't be able to feed their families. And then the other side, how they won't be able to afford to educate their kids. And then on the other side, we've got this sexual harassment and sexual abuse thing going on in our industry that stems from this like bullying culture that we seem to have. And the Me Too movement happens and men are like, but Lee, it's not really as bad as you think. What are you talking about? What are you talking about?
That is very dismissive. Yeah. It's the worst thing you can say, because it does just close the conversation.
What do we say to people who say it's not as bad as you think?
I would question where they get their information from and why they have that opinion. Because, as you said, it's all too common. It's all too common in this industry as well. Like, it's all too common. I can't tell you how many men think that, like, you know, women just have to toughen up, or like, can't women just leave? Like, just go to another workplace, or It's about respect. they shouldn't have to go to another workplace. All workplaces should function respectfully of all employees, gender and otherwise. And if you can do that in your workplace, if you have policies and procedures around that stuff, around discrimination, around harassment, around sexual harassment, around bullying, if you have policies and procedures, and then you have people that follow those policies and procedures, you'll be doing fine. And and that's an employee's right, is to have those rights respected. And for it to be otherwise is not okay. It's just not.
No, I definitely see that there is some sort of a shifting happening, which is really encouraging. You know, you raise these conversations online and people are willing to, you know, I remember talking about just raising the idea of sexual harassment, and I thought it was quite comical that people wanted to debate the meaning of sexual harassment. Well, what are you defining as sexual harassment? Are you fucking kidding me? Like, you clearly know that, like, all the things that absolutely fall into the scope of sexual harassment, you know, unwelcomed sexual behavior, unwelcomed anything around that.
Sexual advances, sexual conversations.
All of it. Like, if we're talking about sexual harassment, you want to start at, well, what do you mean by that? Like, no. I want to talk about boundaries.
Yes, go. Sure.
How do boundaries seem to be that thing that people find very difficult, particularly someone like me.
It is hard.
It really is. I'm a severe over empathizer. I suffer from severe over empathy, and I'm working very heavily on that.
Yeah.
And so boundaries are something that I have worked at instilling in my workplace, and it's a great thing. There's been a lot of resistance to it because I have a lot of people who express a lot of over empathy working for me as well. So boundaries are not something that they're accustomed to. And so when someone needs to start approaching setting boundaries in their culture, what is the best way that they can start approaching boundaries in that way?
Okay, so they're starting to identify what boundaries they want to set.
Yep. So
that's the first. So are you talking about in terms of what's acceptable from their employees?
In the sense that, so if we stick on the idea of sexual harassment, people, so both from employees and from customers, right? So how do they set boundaries that can help their staff feel safe? How do they approach that, the idea of where boundaries need to go?
Okay. So boundaries to me are saying that something, I use it's okay or not okay.
I like that.
Yeah. And that's what I was taught. This comes back to assertiveness as well.
Mm-hmm.
So when you're enforcing a boundary, you're identifying something that doesn't sit right with you. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So for some reason, I don't know, do you have a particular example that you might want me to speak to?
Yeah, let's use the example of flirting.
Okay.
So, because that's a really grey one, you know, like flirting is, you know, I might be flirting with you, but if I might not be flirting with you and you're receiving my behavior as flirting, so where does the boundary lie in that kind of situation? This is one that a lot of employers struggle with. Like, what boundary do I put around flirting in the workplace?
Yeah. Okay. That is a bit of a grey one.
Right.
Because some people like it and some people enjoy it, whether they're in a relationship or not. Some people really enjoy it and see it as harmless, and other people don't.
Even in a culture like America, where flirting is a way you get more tips.
Yep. Yeah, so there's often an enjoyment aspect to flirting.
Mm-hmm.
And not everyone would be uncomfortable with, you know, a good-looking male or female flirting with them. but it's when it crosses the line to someone being uncomfortable with a certain behavior that I would instruct management to concentrate on. So if a particular employee has said to someone that, and they might say it just jokingly at first, are you flirting with me? And they might laugh it off and say, yeah. And someone might make a joke and say, I'm actually happy in my relationship, or, if someone's been assertive enough to ask the flirter to stop and they keep on going, then that's probably an issue where organisationally a manager or an owner or someone needs to intervene. And so depending on how it unfolds, obviously the target would come to you with a complaint and say, I've asked this person to stop flirting with me and they haven't. And then you would elicit more details about that. Do you have any text messages? Do you have any proof? What have they been saying, or what have they been doing? Have they been touching you? How have they been touching you? What exact words do they use? And ask them to give some examples. And if you are satisfied that this is typical of this person and you've seen it happen or other people have seen it happen, you might want to pull that person aside and just say, hey, you seem like you're a really friendly kind of person, and the way you communicate is a little flirtatious, and I've heard that one of our employees has asked you to stop. I really need you to listen to that person and respect their wishes.
So that's the boundary there, right? That's you
Yes.
laying the boundary. I need you to stop.
Setting the expectation that that person is going to heed the requests that have already been given to them by the employee who has already said, I'm not comfortable with this. Can you please stop?
So the employees try to set a boundary. It hasn't been respected. So they've gone to leadership, and leadership set a second boundary.
Yes.
Now, if the perpetrator accepts that boundary, then everything, hopefully they'll go and apologize for the behavior. Is the likelihood, do the numbers say that the likelihood is that they're going to stop that behavior?
I would say each situation is different and each person is different, and you can't really kind of generalize. You have to deal on a case-by-case basis and with the person that you have in front of you, because some people will stop and some people might not. Like, he might continue, and then you need to have another conversation. I've already had this conversation with you, depending on how you want to go. If you want to try an informal kind of consequence, so they're relegated to dishes for the day or for the week.
Is that a form of shaming?
Or I would say it's a form of demotion, which is a consequence for the behavior, and then the person might feel ashamed of themselves, which is not necessarily a bad thing, because it might motivate them not to engage in that behavior again.
Because there's nothing worse than the whole team knowing that they're now on dishes because of what happened.
They're too friendly with one of the staff who's asked them to stop.
Yeah. But what I can see happening from there is that if they're grown up enough to accept the consequence of those actions, then they learn from it and, go back and atone, et cetera, or they rebel and they want to become vengeful. And that doesn't seem like a great recipe.
They might become angry, and if they become angry, then the manager needs to stay engaged with that person.
So they stay engaged with the angry person and kind of...
Yes, and talk to them about why they're angry and try and find some resolution, because it's not okay that the complainant receives any kind of retaliation.
Do you know any psychologists that want to start owning cafes other than you? Because I feel like we need the things that we're asking these cafe owners and managers to do. It's like, I don't have the fucking skills, bro. I don't know.
Yeah. It's not hard. I think if you've got your finger on the pulse, it's not hard to see that an angry person might retaliate against someone who is in quite a vulnerable situation because they've made this complaint and they feel quite shitty. It's quite a hard process to go through to complain and be honest about something that's bothering you.
And stressful for everyone involved.
Yeah. And if they're getting angry about it, you want to keep a lid on that and kind of allow them some time and to talk to their friends and to work through it if they need the afternoon off, so that then their anger isn't impacting on the workplace. Probably a good strategy. Allow them to use their own supports outside of work, even, because that reduces the amount of gossip that might go on. You know, this person said this and this and this, which can be counterproductive as well. If they need the afternoon off to access their own supports, and even because it's, for some people it can be a difficult process to go through to say that, you know, to have this come against them. Do you know what I mean? As the perpetrator, it can be a shameful process, and they'll be feeling their own emotions. And so, some space to be able to work through that might be helpful for some people. For some people, the distraction of the work can be helpful. So just by making coffees would be helpful for them, and they're not for the processing. Type to just do something to get their mind off how they're feeling. Can be helpful. So it really does depend on the person. For the person that gets angry and wants to tell everyone about it and assume that it's not their fault, probably needs some time off and some time to digest.
That's the more likely scenario in our industry.
Yeah, probably needs some time off and some time to digest what's happened, and some help for taking responsibility, and to say that it's okay to make a mistake. And that we don't think any differently of you. I just really need you to stop doing that because it's making someone else uncomfortable. And that's affecting business,
affecting everyone.
It doesn't mean that you're a bad. Yeah, it doesn't mean that you're a bad person. There's a person and there's a behavior. You're making choices that are impacting on someone else. Doesn't mean you're a bad person. You're a good guy. You're just making choices You're just making choices that are causing this reaction in someone else, and we need you to change that.
I remember when I was the head barista at the last place that I worked in Australia, the floor staff weren't quite up to my efficiency standards. Let's just put it politely that way. And all of the baristas were feeling a certain level of frustration over it. And and so the owner had come to me, and I was working weekends there, and we were doing 700-800 covers, between 8 a.m. and 1 p.m. It's a high volume. And the owner came up to me and he said, I just need to say there's a lot of energy coming from this section. Could we tone it down a little bit? Lee, the waitresses don't need to hear that they're fucking lazy and they need to hurry up. Can we just tone the energy down?
Yeah.
I'm like, fuck, I didn't even realize I was doing it. I'm so sorry. And I apologize continuously to every waitress after that. I'm like, okay, I didn't realize that wasn't the way that you, like, I kept saying to them, come on, let's go. Let's get these coffees out. And they were like, she's being really bossy. Like, I'm not being bossy. The coffee's been sitting there for 2 minutes. It needs to go. Let's go. And they felt bullied by that. And then when he came up and said, okay, so there's too much energy coming from this section, we need to tame it down. Yeah. And when he explained to me what that meant, I'm like, okay, so I need to regulate my behavior to deal with these people. A part of me was like, the rebellious part of me was like, why can't they toughen the fuck up and just do what needs to be done? But it's not okay to expect everyone to work to the same standard or to have the same kind of attitude that you have about anything. You're a part of a team. You need to figure out how to be a part of the team, not to be like, I'm the person who's got to dictate and conduct the way all of this goes. Like it's
and encouraged to that extent.
I'm not sure that many people would call me as a head barista anywhere as the most encouraging to the floor staff. That wasn't the way. I was encouraging to other baristas, but no, I was never someone you'd call encouraging when it came to the floor staff. I was just putting coffees out there within 25 seconds. Anything longer than that, and I was going to start. And that, I'm not proud of that. Like that was a big learning curve for me. It's like, so listen, these people are not going to want to work with you if you can't be kind to them. Like figure that out, lady. Like
kindness in high pressure. That's tough.
It was a huge learning for me. I didn't learn it until I had my own business. And it's like, okay, so just because you've been highly conditioned to be systematic and to do these things, not many people are like that, Lee. Exactly.
You have to
you know, that whole empathy thing.
Give them the space to grow.
Oh, it's so exhausting.
It seriously is like doing therapy. It's like
very much like that.
You have to be their agent of change and allow them the space to grow themselves.
And I find myself in the situation like most employers are with me when I tell them this stuff. And they're like, Lee, I just want to run my business. I don't want to be a therapist. I don't want to fix anybody's life. I just want to run my business. I'm like, yeah, but that's part of it. What you're doing, employing people, you are inviting them into a situation whereby they are about to grow. Like you should be their mentor. That's what part of being a business owner is all about.
There's this tasky stuff of business, so making orders, making coffees, but there's the people interactions, and the people interactions are often the hardest, but they are also they can be pretty rewarding when you get someone's loyalty or enjoy their company or help them to learn something new. It's hard to ask someone to grow, to put a boundary in, and to ask that person to consider that what they were doing was not ideal, and to ask them to do something different, and then to wait for that change to happen. And then it's satisfying when it actually does happen.
Oh, it's huge for everyone involved.
Yeah, and it needs to be celebrated for everyone. But yeah, it is really hard to sit back and to not be in control, I think, and not just be able to do it like that yourself. To have to wait and to rely on other people. It's called being human, really.
Yeah, I'm not a fan of that behavior, just saying.
It's about instant gratification.
I'm not a fan of instant gratification either. I'm one of these people who's like, I'm a massive processor of information when it comes to emotional information. And so I process learning that kind of stuff really quickly. And I've only recently learnt that. I just thought that everybody did that stuff very, very quickly. And there was something wrong with me, because when people worked for me, they didn't process this stuff quickly and didn't learn quickly and didn't change quickly enough. And I learned that I'm the weird one. Thanks for coming. That was very uncomfortable. Just saying. It helps to have a best friend who's a psychologist. It's like, just say, I don't know if you know this, you're a freak, and you can't be expecting people to do this.
Dagger to the heart.
He's known me since I was 10. And so he's like been quietly waiting for me to figure out that, ever the psychologist, quietly waiting for me to figure out, like, no, not everybody figures this stuff out this quickly. And then it was a real revelation to me when he told me about it. I'm like, I got a lot of sorries to say. So I'm working very hard at being more patient with people's human evolution. There's that word again, the human evolution side of things.
It's not easy.
No, nor is it fun. How did you get into coffee?
I'm a tight ass.
For anyone, actually, so let me tell you, living in America teaches you, exactly, the language barrier. Living in America teaches you how many Aussie-isms there are. For anyone who doesn't know what tight ass is, it's like frugal.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I'm frugal. I didn't want to pay $14 for a decent 250-gram bag of coffee. So I decided that I was going to buy a roaster and find some beans and roast my own.
I love that. I don't want to spend $14 on a bag of coffee, but I'm going to spend a couple of grand on a roaster and the green.
Yeah.
And you think that that's you being a tight ass. That's brilliant. Oh, God, I love it. You and I are going to be friends.
I could earn my money back. I could earn my money back reasonably quickly.
Yeah, who told you that load of bullshit?
Yeah. Yeah, I'm not the numbers person. I'm the roaster in my business.
Just saying, you're not a tight ass. Just on that side of things, you're not a tight ass.
Yeah, no.
You're just trying to be cleverer than you were. Good one.
Yeah. So I learned how to roast a decent cup of coffee to my taste buds. And I did Ann Cooper's roasting course.
Shout out to that badass.
Yeah, she's awesome.
Yep.
She knows her shit.
Yes, she does.
And she's been around forever. And she's such I complimented her after doing that course because learning is quite a vulnerable process. Admitting that you don't know something and going somewhere for someone to teach you is quite a vulnerable experience, and she was a very safe teacher, and she was quite nurturing in that way, and I love that about her, and I actually congratulated her on that after her course.
And she's figured out the secret with that. Hey, like she ends every session with a beer.
Yeah, totally.
Beer.
I had to have Ribena at the end because
you don't drink?
Was pregnant.
I love it. At least she had an alternative.
Yeah, she gave me Ribena.
For anyone who doesn't know what Ribena is, it's a blackcurrant drink that all of us Aussies...
cordial. Yeah.
Cordial. You know, they don't know what cordial is over here.
Oh,
they don't have
no
cordial.
way.
Yeah. No, I don't even know what the American version of that is. So it's like a sugar syrup that's made out of a fruit, kind of like all of us grew up with coddies.
That you put water in, and you drink it as a kid. It's awesome in summer with ice.
Yes, it's like a shrub. That's another like fancier version of that. But oh, damn, I miss cordial.
Yeah, red cordial was blamed for everyone's hyperactive problem.
Yes, but Ribena, that was a special kind of something. You knew the families that were rich because their kids were drinking Ribena instead of coddies.
Yes, totally.
So you had Ribena at the end of Ann Cooper's thing?
Yeah, I had Ribena because I was pregnant and couldn't drink beer. But yeah, it was an awesome course, and now she's so I went away and had a couple of kids, and then decided I'm going to be a roaster, function in the world again, and decided to do roasting. So I rent Anne's roaster, and she gives me a little bit of guidance.
And so if people want to find you, because we have absolutely taken up far too much of your time, given that you've got 2 children, and it's a Saturday morning.
Yeah, it's been fun.
Excellent. If people want to find you, how do they do that?
So they can email me at fourbirdscoffee at gmail.com, or send me a message on Instagram if you find me on Four Birds Coffee.
We'll include the links in the show notes for this to your Instagram.
That would totally be fine.
I just want to say, first of all, this has been a blast.
Yeah, had fun.
I feel like you and I are going to be friends the rest of our lives, and I'm so excited about that. Second of all, best of luck with Four Birds Coffee. And the other thing is, thank you for doing this, because this is not necessarily an easy conversation. No. And you made it very easy for me to broach this subject, because you're absolutely the right person to do this with. And I hope you'll come back. Please.
Yeah, totally.
Please.
Totally. I just want to say that my intention for talking about this subject was to shed light on a subject that is probably considered a little dark. And it's really nice to have the conversation about it and have a bit of a laugh as well. Mm-hmm. But I hope that we've helped someone in the process.
I do too. And I'm very grateful for you being in our industry. I think that our industry is lucky to have you. And I look forward to you having a very long and successful history in this industry.
Thank you.
You're welcome. And thank you. And I'm here for anything that you need. You know that. But I'll speak to you soon, lady. Thank you very much.
That's good. No worries. Take care.
Bye.
Bye.